She had always known that success came with challenges, but nothing could have prepared her for this night. The invitation had arrived weeks ago, an elegant envelope with gold embossing, sent by one of the wealthiest families in the country. She studied it carefully on her desk, turning it over in her hands. It was not just an invitation to a party. It was a chance to finalize a business deal worth $5 billion, a deal that could take her company to heights few could imagine. Yet beneath the excitement, she felt a faint chill. She knew that entering a world so distant from her own would not be easy. Her journey to this point had not been simple. She grew up in a neighborhood where most people worked hard just to make ends meet. Luxury and opulence were concepts she had only seen in movies or magazines, not in real life. But through determination, skill, and a clear vision, she had built her company from the ground up. Every contract she signed, every challenge she overcame, had brought her closer to this moment. And now, standing on the edge of one of the biggest opportunities of her career, she felt both pride and apprehension. On the evening of the event, she dressed with care. She chose an outfit that was elegant, professional, and understated. Clothing that commanded respect without shouting for attention. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she reminded herself to stay calm, to keep her confidence steady. This was not a night for anger or reaction. It was a night for poise, for showing that she belonged in a room where wealth and privilege were the norm. The drive to the mansion was quiet. The streets grew wider, the cars more expensive, and the trees lined with perfectly manicured gardens. She noticed the security at the gates, a team of uniformed personnel checking each car and guest meticulously. The world she was entering was one of power and meticulous control, a world where appearances mattered as much as actions. She reminded herself that she had earned her place here, not as a guest, but as a potential equal in business. When she arrived, the mansion itself was breathtaking. Towering walls, sparkling lights, and a grand driveway that led to the entrance created an almost surreal feeling. She took a deep breath before stepping out of her car. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt the subtle shifts in the room's energy. Conversations paused. Glasses were set down and eyes turned in her direction. She could feel the weight of judgment, the unspoken questions. Who was she, and why was she here? At first, she smiled politely, offering greetings to the people she passed. Some returned the gesture warmly, others with a faint smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. The family hosting the party, known for their wealth, influence, and often controversial behavior, watched her closely. She could sense the curiosity, but also a trace of amusement in their glances, as if they were trying to figure out whether she belonged. She reminded herself that their opinions were not her concern. She had worked too hard to let strangers define her worth. The room was filled with every symbol of luxury imaginable. Crystal chandeliers reflected light in sparkling patterns across the walls. Tables were adorned with flowers and fine china, and a string quartet played soft music in the corner. Guests wore designer clothing and jewelry that glittered under the lights. In the middle of all this, she walked with her head held high, aware of her presence, yet unwilling to let herself be swallowed by the grandeur or intimidated by it. But it did not take long for the tension to make itself known. As she engaged in polite conversation with one of the family members, she noticed the subtle sneers, the whispers exchanged among the staff, and the occasional glance of disbelief from other guests. At first, she brushed it off as nerves, telling herself that these people were unused to seeing someone like her in their rarefied circles. But soon it became clearer that the attention was not neutral curiosity. It was judgment, rooted in old biases and prejudices. Despite this, she maintained her composure. She laughed when appropriate, nodded respectfully when others spoke, and guided the conversation toward the business at hand. Her mind was sharp, analyzing every gesture, every word, every opportunity, to gain a clearer understanding of the family's intentions. She knew that they had a reputation for charm on the surface, but often tested anyone they saw as a potential equal. Tonight, she would not falter. As the evening progressed, she noticed something troubling. The family, under the guise of casual jokes, began to make comments that were clearly meant to belittle her. It was subtle at first, A remark about her background, a sarcastic compliment that hinted at surprise she could reach her level of success. Then, the comments became sharper, more pointed, and she could see the laughter ripple through the room. Some guests joined in hesitantly, others pretended not to hear. She realized in that moment how isolating it could feel to be the only person standing firm against mockery in a room full of people who were complicit in silence. Still, she did not lose her calm. She continued to speak with clarity, never raising her voice, never showing anger, but inside a fire burned. She had worked her entire life to be here, and she would not allow anyone to diminish her accomplishments with thoughtless words or cruel laughter. Each joke, each smirk, each whispered comment became a test of her patience and resolve. She observed carefully, storing each moment mentally, knowing that every interaction tonight was a lesson, a clue, and a challenge. As she moved through the room, she found allies, people who, though perhaps intimidated by the family's wealth, recognized her intelligence and poise. These brief connections were small, almost imperceptible, but they reminded her that she was not alone. Even in a room designed to intimidate, she could find subtle signs of respect and acknowledgement. These moments gave her strength, reinforcing her decision to stay and face whatever came next. Near the center of the room, the family gathered together, watching her with quiet amusement. They assumed that their wealth and social dominance could make her uneasy, perhaps even push her out of the room. But as she approached them, with a polite greeting and firm handshake, they quickly realized that she would not be easily intimidated. Her confidence was not loud or brash. It was calm, deliberate, and unwavering. And in that moment, she knew that this encounter, uncomfortable as it was, would shape the next stage of her life in ways they could not possibly imagine. By the end of the first hour, it was clear that the evening would not be simple. The luxury, the music, and the polite conversation could not mask the underlying currents of prejudice and testing. Yet she remained composed, reminding herself of the stakes, the deal, her company's future, and her own principles. She understood that this night was not just about money or opportunity. It was about asserting her place in a world that often tried to exclude people like her. She took a quiet moment to step aside, observing the room from a distance. She could see the patterns, the subtle alliances, and the social hierarchies at play. Every smile, every glance, every whispered comment told a story. And she was determined to write her own story in this room, one defined not by fear but by dignity, intelligence, and unwavering self-respect. As the music played softly in the background and the light sparkled across the room, she straightened her posture, adjusted her attire, and prepared for the moments ahead. She knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The first impressions had been made, the judgments cast, and the subtle ridicule had begun, but she was ready. She would not let a room full of wealth and privilege shake her confidence. She had come here not just to survive, but to show that her presence mattered, that her voice deserved to be heard, and that no amount of mockery could diminish her achievements. The night had only just begun, but in that moment she felt a quiet power settle over her. She was here, fully present, fully aware, and fully capable of turning this challenge into an opportunity. The stakes were high, the tension thick, but she had faced obstacles before and had overcome them. Tonight would be no different. She would navigate the intricate dance of wealth, power, and prejudice with skill, grace, and an unwavering sense of self. And with that thought, she stepped back into the crowd, her eyes calm, her expression steady, and her mind focused. She knew that the coming hours would test her, but she was ready. She had already proven to herself that she belonged in this room. Now, it was time to show the world. The night had grown deeper, and the lights in the mansion reflected softly on the polished floors, casting long, shimmering shadows. The music had slowed into a gentle hum, but the tension in the room had grown heavier. She moved carefully, knowing that every word, every gesture, and every smile mattered in this delicate environment. What had begun as polite curiosity from the other guests was now turning into something sharper. She could feel it. the weight of judgment pressing against her, almost invisible but undeniable. It started subtly. A comment here, a joke there, delivered with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. At first she ignored them, assuming perhaps they were attempting light humor. But soon the remarks became pointed. One of the family members made an offhand comment about her background, phrased as a question. "You've really come far, haven't you? It's rare to see someone like you in a place like this." The words were wrapped in a smile, but the tone carried a trace of disbelief. A subtle disbelief that her accomplishments could be real. She smiled politely, responding with measured calm, but inside a quiet storm was forming. She had spent years building her company, making smart decisions and earning respect in industries where she often stood alone. She had faced prejudice before, but this was different. This was wealth and privilege trying to test her, to remind her of a social hierarchy that had nothing to do with talent or skill. She understood it clearly. They were attempting to see if she could be intimidated. The whispers started next. Not directly to her, but within the group of wealthy guests, careful enough to be heard if one listened. They commented on her outfit, her demeanor, and even the way she walked across the room. Some spoke as if they were surprised she could carry herself with such grace. Others laughed at little jokes that were meant to belittle. She heard enough to understand that this was no accident. It was a coordinated, unspoken effort to make her feel small, to remind her of their world and her perceived place outside of it. Despite the uncomfortable environment, she refused to react with anger. Instead, she focused on her breathing, her posture, and her words. She had learned long ago that reacting to insults with emotion often gave the other side power. Calmness, however, was a weapon few knew how to counter. She continued to move through the crowd with poise, speaking clearly, responding politely, and carefully guiding conversations toward business matters. She would not let this evening be defined by their prejudice, even if they wanted it to be. But it was not easy. Each remark, each sneer felt like a small stone dropped into her chest. She could feel the tension building, the room's energy shifting in subtle ways. Some guests tried to mask their discomfort, but their eyes betrayed them. They saw the injustice in the comments, yet many remained silent, afraid of upsetting the family or revealing their own biases. She noticed these expressions, filing them away in her mind, recognizing that even allies could be trapped by fear or habit. As the evening went on, the family's tactics became bolder. One of the hosts leaned close under the guise of conversation and asked, "Do you really think this deal will work? It's such a big number and I don't want to see it fail." The words seemed innocent, but the undertone was clear, doubt wrapped in condescension. She met the gaze without flinching, replying calmly with facts, figures, and her vision for the project. She didn't raise her voice, didn't let her expression change. But the clarity and confidence in her words carried a silent message. She was not afraid, and she was fully capable. The other guests watched quietly, sensing the shift. There was a moment of pause, a flicker of recognition that she was not someone to be dismissed easily. Some faces softened, others turned away, unsure of how to respond. The family, however, did not like this reaction. They were used to controlling rooms, dictating conversations, and testing the limits of anyone outside their circle. For the first time, they met resistance not with argument but with calm strength. A resistance they had not anticipated. She found a quiet corner and took a small moment to gather her thoughts. The night was long, and the emotional weight of the subtle mockery was tiring. Yet she reminded herself why she was here. The deal, her company, and the principle of standing firm against disrespect. She understood clearly that her presence alone was a statement. She was showing that she could navigate spaces that were not designed for her, and that success was not limited by prejudice or privilege. The family's behavior escalated further. During dinner, when the formalities of the event allowed for more intimate conversation, one of them made a remark disguised as humor. "It's interesting to see someone with your background trying to play in this league." Laughter rippled through the table, polite on the surface but edged with ridicule. The words were meant to sting, to remind her of the social gap between them. Yet she remained composed, responding with a subtle smile and redirecting the conversation to professional topics. Her knowledge, her experience, and her ability to speak with authority began to create cracks in their confidence, and she could see it. Throughout the evening, she noticed how the family tried to control the narrative, whispering to each other, signaling to guests, attempting to create a collective perception. She realized that their wealth had allowed them to shape opinions but not facts. They could influence the room, but they could not diminish her skills or achievements. With every passing hour, her confidence grew, tempered by the challenges she faced. It was not just about the insults or the jokes. It was about respect or the lack of it. She understood that respect was something earned and given freely, not assumed because of money or lineage. And tonight she would not allow anyone to assume she would give them her respect, merely because they were wealthy. She knew her worth and her accomplishments. The room could attempt to belittle her, but she could stand taller than their arrogance if she chose to. As the night deepened, the energy in the room shifted further. Guests who had initially been impressed or curious began to grow restless, sensing the underlying tension. Some leaned closer to her in hushed conversations, offering quiet acknowledgement of her composure. These small moments reminded her that influence was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was subtle, powerful, and transformative. Even in a room designed to intimidate, she could inspire respect quietly without needing to raise her voice. She found herself reflecting on her journey. Every challenge she had faced, every setback, and every victory had prepared her for this moment. She remembered the long nights of work, the risks she had taken, and the people who had doubted her along the way. None of it compared to the weight of this evening, yet she felt grounded. Each word spoken against her only strengthened her resolve. She was not here to play a game of ego. She was here to represent her company, her values, and her principles, and nothing would shake her from that purpose. As the final hours of the party approached, she noticed a subtle shift in the family's demeanor. The amusement, the condescension, and the carefully hidden smirks began to falter. They realized that their attempts to mock, belittle, or intimidate were not working. She had turned their own tactics against them, not with confrontation but with calm, deliberate presence. They could not control her reactions, and for the first time, their power in the room felt incomplete. By the end of the night, she had made her intentions clear. She had navigated every attempt to undermine her, every joke, every whisper with dignity. She had shown that she was not only capable of holding her own in the room, but that she would not be manipulated or intimidated. Her actions spoke louder than any words could. Respect is earned through integrity, competence, and courage, not assumed through wealth or status. As she stepped toward the exit, she looked back at the room one last time. She felt a quiet satisfaction. The family, powerful as they were, had underestimated her. The guests, many of whom had initially doubted her, had seen her strength. And she herself had learned something invaluable, that no matter the environment, no matter the challenges, self-respect and calm determination were tools stronger than any insult or condescension. The drive home was silent, reflective. She replayed the evening in her mind, analyzing every interaction, every subtle insult, and every moment of composure. She knew that the real test was not over. The deal still loomed ahead and decisions had to be made. But tonight had proven something essential. She could face prejudice, mockery, and subtle attacks with strength and dignity. She had already won a moral victory, one that no amount of money or influence could diminish. By the time she reached her home, the night had faded into quiet reflection. She knew the challenges ahead would be just as complex, just as demanding, but the foundation had been laid. She had seen the lengths people would go to test her, to belittle her, and she had endured without losing her composure. That night she understood clearly that her power was not in matching theirs, but in remaining unshaken, grounded in her own values and her own worth. And as she closed the door behind her, a sense of calm determination settled over her. Tomorrow the real decisions would begin, but tonight had already proved that she could face the highest walls of privilege without fear, without compromise, and without losing herself. She had survived the ridicule, navigated the condescension, and emerged stronger, ready for whatever came next. The morning after the party, she woke with a mixture of reflection and determination. The previous night had been exhausting, not just physically but emotionally. The subtle mockery, the whispers, and the thinly veiled judgments had left an impression, but not one that weakened her. Instead, it sharpened her resolve. She realized that she could not simply attend such events and endure disrespect silently. If she wanted to protect herself and her company, she needed to act strategically. She spent the day reviewing notes from the evening, recalling every conversation, every glance, and every smirk. What had seemed like small slights now revealed themselves as patterns of behavior. The family was used to testing people, especially those they perceived as outsiders. They believed wealth and social position gave them the right to belittle others. But she had learned to recognize such behavior long ago, and she knew exactly how to respond. Not with anger, but with intelligence and careful planning. By afternoon, she had a clear plan. She would meet the family again, but this time she would not simply attend. She would assert herself. She needed to show them that she could not be undermined, that her expertise, her accomplishments, and her judgment were not negotiable. This was not just about the $5 billion deal. It was about principle, dignity, and establishing that she could navigate spaces dominated by privilege without compromising herself. The meeting was arranged in a smaller, more intimate setting than the previous night's party. A private room with a polished table, high ceilings, and sunlight streaming through tall windows gave an air of importance and formality. The family greeted her with polite smiles, but she could sense the underlying tension. They had underestimated her before, but now they could see that she was deliberate, confident, and focused. She returned their greetings calmly, shaking hands firmly and maintaining eye contact. As the conversation began, the family tried to steer it toward casual remarks, the same condescending tone they had used at the party. One of them said, "We're curious how someone with your background thinks such a large deal is possible." The words were intended to diminish her, to suggest she was overstepping her limits. She listened carefully, nodding slightly, then responded with precise facts and data. She outlined her strategy, her projections, and the thorough research her team had conducted. Her voice was steady, professional, and unwavering, leaving no room for doubt. What happened next was subtle but powerful. As she spoke, the family's initial amusement began to fade. Their eyes, which had once carried an air of superiority, now reflected a mixture of surprise and cautious respect. They realized that their attempts to belittle her were ineffective. She was not intimidated, and more importantly, she was prepared. Every question they asked, every insinuation they made, was met with clarity and authority. One of the family members, trying a different tactic, leaned forward and said, "You know, it's unusual for someone like you to challenge our assumptions so directly." The remark was layered, an attempt to suggest that she did not belong in this room, but also a test to see if she would react emotionally. She smiled slightly, acknowledging the comment without anger. "I believe assumptions are only as valuable as the evidence behind them," she replied calmly. "And I have evidence to support every projection, every plan, and every decision we are discussing." The room grew quiet. The family exchanged glances, sensing that their usual methods of control were failing. For years, they had relied on charm, wealth, and social influence to maintain dominance. They were unprepared for someone who combined intelligence, preparation, and calm authority. Her ability to remain composed while systematically addressing every doubt slowly began to shift the power dynamic. She noticed that some of the family's allies in the room, the ones who had seemed hesitant at the party, were now observing her with a new kind of respect. They whispered among themselves, noting her professionalism and clarity. Even though the family still held social and financial power, it was clear that her competence was undeniable. She realized that influence could extend beyond wealth. Knowledge, preparation, and confidence were just as potent, if not more. At one point, the conversation turned to a potential risk in the deal. The family attempted to frame it in a way that implied her strategy was reckless. She listened attentively, acknowledging the concern, then addressed it point by point. Her explanation was thorough, backed by data, risk analysis, and contingency plans. She was careful not to sound defensive. Instead, she projected calm authority. By the end of her response, the room could no longer deny her capability. She had turned their challenge into an opportunity to demonstrate mastery. There was a subtle moment of tension when one of the family members tried a personal remark, hinting at stereotypes about her background. She paused, took a deep breath, and responded, not with anger but with precision. She reframed the comment in terms of her achievements and vision, highlighting her journey without confrontation. Her words carried a quiet power. She was not defined by their assumptions, but by her accomplishments and the value she brought to the table. As the discussion continued, she observed the shifts in the room. The family, who had assumed complete control, now listened carefully. Their tone had softened slightly, their laughter diminished. She could see the realization forming in their eyes. They were no longer the dominant force. She had earned a place at the table through preparation, confidence, and unwavering composure. Her presence was no longer a novelty. They had to acknowledge her competence. Despite this, she remained vigilant. She knew that the battle was not won yet, and that the family could revert to their old tactics at any moment. She stayed focused on the goals of the meeting, guiding the conversation back to the deal and the strategic decisions required. She emphasized collaboration, the benefits for all parties, and the meticulous planning behind every proposal. Her words were deliberate, measured, and persuasive, creating an atmosphere of respect and professionalism. By the end of the meeting, the family had changed. They no longer treated her as an outsider to be tested. Instead, they began to engage with her as a professional with authority and vision. She had turned the initial ridicule into an opportunity to assert her expertise and demonstrate her capability. The subtle power shift was evident not in grand gestures, but in the way they now listened, nodded, and responded thoughtfully. After the meeting, she stepped outside to collect her thoughts. The air was crisp and refreshing, a sharp contrast to the intensity of the room. She reflected on what had occurred. She had faced prejudice and subtle mockery with calm authority. She had turned attempts to undermine her into opportunities to demonstrate competence. And she had learned that power is not always in wealth or status. It is also in knowledge, preparation, and composure. She also understood that this was only part of the journey. The family still held significant influence and financial power, and the ultimate decision about the deal was still pending. But she felt confident that she had shifted the dynamic. They had underestimated her, and now they knew that she could not be intimidated or dismissed easily. She had proven her strength without anger, without confrontation, and without compromise. In the following days, she carefully reviewed the outcomes of the meeting, analyzing every response, every gesture, and every word. She consulted her team, discussing strategy and potential next steps. While the family's wealth and influence were considerable, she realized that her values, integrity, and clear vision gave her leverage that money alone could not. She was in control of her choices, her company, and her response to every challenge they presented. As she prepared for the next stage of the negotiation, she felt a sense of calm determination. The family's mockery and subtle attacks had revealed more about their character than her abilities. She knew that continuing with the deal would require not just strategy, but clear principles. She had the opportunity to assert not only her business acumen, but also her values and standards. Looking back on the past few days, she reflected on her journey. She had navigated spaces designed to intimidate, endured subtle prejudice, and emerged with her dignity intact. She had turned challenges into opportunities and ridicule into respect. And while the deal remained uncertain, one thing was clear. She had established her presence, her authority, and her principles. No amount of wealth or privilege could take that away. That evening, as the sun set and the city lights began to sparkle, she allowed herself a quiet moment of pride. The family had tried to diminish her, to test her limits, and to challenge her confidence. Yet she had faced every challenge with poise, intelligence, and careful strategy. She had turned the tables not with aggression, but with clarity, composure, and unwavering self-respect. And she knew that the decision she would make next would carry even greater weight, not just for her company, but for her principles, her dignity, and the legacy she wanted to create. She felt ready. The next chapter of this journey would demand courage, judgment, and clear values. But she knew that having faced the subtle mockery and prejudice head-on, she could navigate the complexities ahead. She had turned a night of ridicule into a morning of empowerment, proving that strength is often quiet, deliberate, and unwavering. The days after the meeting were filled with reflection, analysis, and careful consideration. She spent hours in her office reviewing every detail of the discussions, every exchange with the family, and every subtle signal she had noticed at the party. The $5 billion deal was enormous, a transformative opportunity that could elevate her company to unprecedented heights. Yet alongside the numbers and projections, she weighed something even more important: integrity, respect, and self-worth. She knew that money and growth were important, but she also understood that accepting an offer from people who had ridiculed her was not the same as accepting a business opportunity. It was a choice that went beyond financial gain. It was a test of her values. Every successful person faces difficult decisions, she reminded herself, but few are as personal as this one. It was not about whether she could do the work. It was about whether she was willing to compromise her principles for the sake of profit. Her mind kept replaying the party and the meeting. She remembered the whispers, the jokes, the subtle disbelief in the room, and the moments when the family tried to belittle her under the guise of humor. She had handled each situation with composure, intelligence, and strength. She had turned their condescension into a demonstration of her ability, showing that wealth and status did not intimidate her. Yet, she could not ignore the fact that their behavior reflected their character, and that working with people who treated her with such disrespect could carry consequences beyond the immediate deal. She called a meeting with her executive team, explaining the situation with clarity and calm. They reviewed the numbers, the projections, and the terms of the deal. Everyone acknowledged that it was a rare opportunity, potentially life-changing. But she also made it clear that their decision would not be dictated solely by money. Respect, alignment of values, and trust were just as critical as profit margins. Her team, inspired by her clarity, supported her in weighing the options carefully, providing insight but leaving the ultimate choice in her hands. She spent the following day walking through the city streets, thinking deeply. The sounds of the city, the chatter of people, the hum of traffic, the occasional laughter, reminded her of the world she had worked hard to navigate. She thought about the communities that had shaped her, the mentors who had guided her, and the countless hours of effort that had brought her to this moment. Accepting the deal would mean financial gain, but it would also signal that disrespect and prejudice could be overlooked for profit. She could not reconcile that with who she was or what she stood for. That evening, she reflected on her journey in silence. She remembered the countless obstacles she had faced, doors that had closed unexpectedly, opportunities lost to bias, and the constant need to prove herself in spaces where others assumed she did not belong. Each challenge had taught her resilience, patience, and the importance of holding on to her values. She realized that this decision, while daunting, was another chance to demonstrate those principles. It was not just a business choice. It was a statement about integrity, self-respect, and standing up to prejudice. She reached out to one of her trusted advisors, someone who had been with her since the earliest days of her company. They spoke at length about the family, the deal, and the potential repercussions of either accepting or rejecting the offer. Her advisor reminded her that the world often rewards those who take risks, but it also respects those who act with integrity, even when it comes at a personal cost. Their conversation reinforced her own convictions. She could not accept a deal that came with the price of her dignity or compromised her values. In the following days, she drafted her decision carefully. She wrote a letter to the family, professional yet firm, outlining her choice. She expressed gratitude for the opportunity and respect for the potential collaboration, but made it clear that she could not move forward under circumstances where respect and mutual dignity were lacking. Her words were deliberate, leaving no room for misunderstanding. She did not attack or insult. Instead, she framed the decision in terms of her principles, her standards, and her commitment to integrity. Before sending the letter, she reviewed it multiple times, considering both the tone and the message. Every word mattered. She wanted to ensure that the family understood her decision was thoughtful, deliberate, and non-confrontational. She did not aim to shame them, but to assert her boundaries clearly and professionally. This was a rare opportunity to make a statement that combined business acumen with personal integrity, a reminder that respect and values could not be bought, borrowed, or ignored. When she finally sent the letter, a sense of calm washed over her. The decision had been made, the choice clear, and the action taken. She knew that canceling the deal might surprise the family, potentially anger them, or create tension in the business world. Yet she also knew that it was the right decision. For the first time in days, she felt fully aligned with herself, her values, and her purpose. She had acted not out of fear, anger, or spite, but from a place of clarity, strength, and integrity. The news of her decision traveled quickly. Within hours, whispers began to circulate in business circles. Some people admired her courage, praising her for standing firm in the face of wealth and privilege. Others were surprised by the choice, questioning whether she had given up a massive opportunity. She remained undisturbed by the reactions. She understood that the right decision was not always the most popular or the easiest. It was the one that aligned with her principles, her self-respect, and the long-term vision for her company. As she continued her work, she noticed subtle changes in the industry's perception of her. Respect for her increased, not just because of the financial value she could create, but because of the integrity she had demonstrated. She became an example of strength, resilience, and self-respect in professional spaces often dominated by wealth, status, and privilege. Her decision sent a powerful message. Success was not just about financial gain, but also about how one conducted oneself, the standards one upheld, and the boundaries one maintained. She reflected on the family's behavior and realized that their ridicule and condescension had revealed more about them than about her. Their assumptions, jokes, and attempts to undermine her were a reflection of insecurity and entitlement, not of her worth or competence. By canceling the deal, she reclaimed her power and agency. She demonstrated that she would not tolerate disrespect, regardless of how much money or influence someone held. Her actions reinforced the principle that integrity could not be bought, negotiated, or compromised. The decision also strengthened her team. They saw firsthand the importance of standing firm in the face of pressure and ridicule. They understood that leadership was not just about making smart business choices, but about modeling values, demonstrating resilience, and inspiring others through action. Her example created a culture of respect, accountability, and courage that extended beyond the immediate situation. The impact of her decision would resonate throughout her company for years to come. In the weeks following the cancellation, she continued to pursue other opportunities, guided by the same principles. She sought partnerships with people and companies that valued mutual respect, integrity, and collaboration. She realized that the right opportunities often come not in the form of the largest deals, but in environments where values align, trust is mutual, and potential is recognized without prejudice. By staying true to herself, she discovered that success was not limited by wealth or status, but enhanced by the authenticity of her actions. Looking back, she understood that canceling the $5 billion deal was not a loss. It was a statement of empowerment. It was proof that she could navigate the highest levels of business without sacrificing her dignity. She had transformed an uncomfortable and potentially harmful situation into an opportunity to assert her values, model integrity, and inspire others. Her decision reverberated beyond her own company, influencing colleagues, peers, and even competitors who witnessed her courage and professionalism. As she reflected quietly one evening, she felt a profound sense of clarity. The family's ridicule, the subtle mockery, and the challenges she faced were not obstacles. They were catalysts for growth, strength, and self-assertion. By choosing integrity over immediate gain, she had set a precedent for how she would conduct business, how she would lead her team, and how she would navigate the world. She realized that true success is measured not by the size of a deal, but by the strength of one's principles and the courage to uphold them. Her story began to inspire others. Colleagues in her industry admired her, seeing her as a symbol of resilience and dignity. Young professionals, especially women and people of color, found encouragement in her actions, understanding that they too could navigate spaces dominated by wealth, privilege, and prejudice without compromising their values. Her decision became a quiet revolution, proving that power and influence do not always reside with money, but also with character, integrity, and courage. By the end of this chapter in her life, she felt stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. She had faced ridicule, condescension, and subtle attacks with calm, deliberate strength. She had turned an opportunity for compromise into a demonstration of principle, and she had done so without anger, without revenge, and without diminishing her professionalism. She had reclaimed her power, upheld her integrity, and shown the world that success is defined not just by wealth but by courage, dignity, and respect. The days after she canceled the $5 billion deal were surprisingly quiet at first. She returned to her office with a calm, measured pace, expecting perhaps tension, backlash, or even criticism from peers who might not understand her choice. Yet instead of chaos, she found clarity, purpose, and a renewed sense of direction. The decision she had made, the one that prioritized integrity over immediate profit, had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Her team gathered around her that morning, eager to hear her reflections. They were impressed not just by the magnitude of the decision but by the way she had executed it. She explained calmly why she had canceled the deal, emphasizing respect, dignity and values as critical pillars of both leadership and business. They listened intently, nodding, inspired by her courage. In that moment, it became clear that her influence went beyond financial strategy. It was her strength, wisdom, and clarity of purpose that shaped her company's culture. Within a few days, word of her decision spread through business circles. The media caught wind of the story, and articles began to appear, praising her for standing firm in the face of immense wealth and privilege. Headlines highlighted her integrity, professionalism, and courage, and the story quickly went viral across social platforms. She was inundated with messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers, congratulating her on her bravery. People admired that she had refused to compromise her values, despite the potential financial gain. The family whose deal she had canceled, meanwhile, faced their own repercussions. Their condescending behavior, previously unnoticed by many, now came under scrutiny. Business associates, partners, and journalists questioned their professionalism and judgment. It became clear that the ridicule they had displayed at the party had left a lasting impression, not of her weakness, but of their own flaws. She realized that standing firm had not only reinforced her values, but had also revealed the character of those she refused to work with. For her company, the aftermath was equally transformative. The story of her decision resonated with potential partners and clients. Many saw her as a leader who combined intelligence with principle, someone whose decisions were guided by ethics as much as strategy. New opportunities began to emerge not just because of her expertise, but because people wanted to work with someone they could respect. Her network expanded in unexpected ways, bringing collaborations that were built on mutual trust and respect, rather than intimidation or wealth. She also noticed a subtle but profound change within her team. Employees who had admired her now felt a deeper sense of loyalty and pride. They saw firsthand what it meant to act with integrity and courage, even when the stakes were unimaginably high. This became a defining moment in the culture of her company. Integrity, respect, and courage were no longer abstract values. They were lived, demonstrated, and rewarded. Her example set a precedent that would influence decisions and behavior within the organization for years to come. As weeks passed, she reflected on the personal growth that had come from the experience. The ridicule, the testing, and the subtle attempts to undermine her had been challenging, but they had also provided clarity. She realized that strength is not always measured in victories or financial success, but in the courage to stand firm, even when it is difficult, uncomfortable, or unpopular. By refusing to compromise, she had defined her own boundaries and principles, something no amount of wealth or influence could ever dictate. She also recognized the ripple effect her actions had on others outside her immediate circle. Young professionals, especially women and people of color, began reaching out to her, sharing how inspired they were by her decision. They spoke of their own experiences with prejudice, bias, and subtle belittlement, and how her example gave them courage to assert themselves in their workplaces. She realized that her actions were not just shaping her own journey, but helping to create a broader culture of empowerment and resilience. The family, meanwhile, attempted to repair their image quietly, but the damage had been done. Their condescending jokes, whispered comments, and attempts at ridicule had been exposed to the world. She did not need to take revenge or confront them publicly. The integrity of her choice spoke louder than any words could. Their reputation, built on wealth and privilege, had been subtly tarnished by their own actions, while her credibility and respect grew. The contrast was stark, and it was undeniable to anyone observing. Financially, the company did not suffer. In fact, new opportunities arose precisely because she had made a principled decision. Partners were drawn to her not just for potential profits, but because they could trust her judgment and respect her standards. The story of the canceled deal became a testament to how values, ethics, and intelligence could coexist with strategic business acumen. People began to understand that working with someone of integrity was not a limitation, but a competitive advantage. She also noticed the personal satisfaction that came from making the right choice. Success had always been important to her, but she realized that success without respect and dignity was hollow. By asserting her boundaries and refusing to accept belittlement, she had reclaimed her power in a way that no financial gain could ever provide. She felt stronger, more confident, and more grounded in her identity than ever before. The experience also gave her insight into the nature of privilege and power. She understood that wealth and status can sometimes blind people to the realities of others' experiences. The family's ridicule had revealed more about their insecurities and assumptions than it had about her. By refusing to react with anger or fear, she had turned their behavior into an opportunity for reflection, not just for herself, but for those around her. She had demonstrated that true influence comes from competence, character, and courage, not inherited wealth. Over the next few months, she continued to lead her company with clarity and purpose. Every decision, every partnership, and every strategy was guided by the principles she had reinforced through the canceled deal. Her reputation continued to grow, and she became a sought-after speaker and mentor, sharing her experiences with those who faced similar challenges in their professional lives. Her story became an example of how courage, integrity, and resilience could transform not just a business, but the people and culture around it. She also reflected on how the experience had changed her perspective on opportunity. She realized that not every deal, no matter how lucrative, is worth pursuing. The right opportunity is one that aligns with values, ethics, and mutual respect. She learned that financial gain alone is never enough. It must be paired with principles and integrity to create lasting success and fulfillment. This understanding shaped her approach to business, leadership, and life moving forward. One quiet evening, she sat in her office looking out over the city skyline. The lights below reminded her of the vastness of the world and the endless possibilities it held. She thought back to the party, the whispers, and the ridicule, and she smiled quietly to herself. Those moments, once uncomfortable and challenging, had become catalysts for growth, empowerment, and clarity. She had turned a test of character into a triumph of principle, and in doing so, she had created a legacy that extended far beyond the boardroom. Her story also became a lesson in resilience and emotional intelligence. She had learned that responding with calm, clarity, and strategy often has a greater impact than confrontation or anger. By observing carefully, understanding motives, and acting with integrity, she had not only defended herself but had also transformed the perception of those around her. She had shown that strength is subtle, thoughtful, and deliberate, and that true influence comes from consistent, principled action. The response from the broader business world was remarkable. She received invitations to speak at conferences, participate in panels, and mentor emerging entrepreneurs. People wanted to understand how she had navigated a high-pressure, high-stakes situation with integrity and poise. Her story was shared widely, not as a tale of conflict, but as an inspiring example of how values, dignity, and courage can coexist with professional success. Reflecting on her journey, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced ridicule, prejudice, and subtle attacks with calm determination. She had turned an uncomfortable and potentially harmful situation into an opportunity to assert her values and demonstrate her strength. And in doing so, she had inspired others, strengthened her team, and shaped a culture that valued integrity as much as results. In the end, she realized that success is not only about wealth or influence, it is about character, courage, and the ability to act with integrity in every situation. She had canceled a $5 billion deal, and yet she had gained something far greater: the respect of her peers, the admiration of her team, and the knowledge that she could stand firm in any circumstance. Her story became a testament to the power of self-respect, moral courage, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing one's worth. She understood that the journey was ongoing. Challenges would continue to arise, but she now had the confidence and clarity to navigate them. Every decision, every partnership, and every opportunity would be guided by the principles she had reinforced through her actions. She had learned that standing firm is not just an act of defiance, it is a statement of purpose, a measure of character, and a foundation for lasting success. And as she looked toward the future, she felt an unwavering sense of empowerment. She had faced ridicule, prejudice, and subtle challenges, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. She had demonstrated that true triumph is not measured solely by wealth or deals, but by the courage to stand firm, act with integrity, and inspire those around you.